What would you do if a police officer suddenly arrested you inside a crowded courthouse, only minutes before the judge walked into the courtroom and changed everyone's day forever? Imagine yourself standing inside a busy courthouse on an ordinary Monday morning. Lawyers are reviewing their notes. Families are quietly waiting on wooden benches. Court reporters are setting up their cameras outside the courtroom doors. Security officers are guiding visitors through the entrance. Everything seems calm. Then, without warning, one unexpected moment brings the entire courthouse to a stop. It was just before 9 o'clock when Emily Carter, a quiet woman in her late 30s, walked through the courthouse entrance carrying a small leather folder. She wore a simple blue dress with a light gray coat over her shoulders. There was nothing expensive about her appearance. She didn't wear flashy jewelry or carry a designer handbag. To everyone around her, she looked like an ordinary visitor with important papers to deliver. Emily smiled politely at the courthouse security desk. "Good morning." The security officer returned the greeting. "Good morning, ma'am. Please place your folder on the scanner." "Of course." Emily carefully placed the folder onto the security belt and waited patiently. At that moment, another officer rushed toward the checkpoint holding a printed notice. "Stop the scanner," he shouted. Everyone inside the entrance turned to look. The room suddenly became silent. Officer Daniel Harris walked quickly to the security desk and picked up Emily's folder before it reached the scanner. "Is this yours?" he asked firmly. Emily nodded. "Yes, officer. Where are you taking these documents?" "To courtroom 3. "What kind of documents?" "They've been requested by the court." Officer Harris narrowed his eyes. "Who requested them?" Emily answered calmly. "I'm sorry, but I'd rather hand them directly to the court staff." The answer immediately made the officer suspicious. "I need a clearer answer than that." Emily remained respectful. "I understand. I'll gladly explain after the proper court staff arrives." Several people waiting nearby quietly watched the conversation. One lawyer whispered, "She seems very calm." Another replied, "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." Officer Harris wasn't convinced. "We've received information that important court documents may have been removed without authorization." Emily looked surprised. "I wasn't aware of that." "Then why won't you answer my questions?" "I am answering them." She smiled gently. "I simply don't want confidential court documents discussed in a public hallway." The officer folded his arms. "Until I know exactly what's happening, you're not going anywhere." Emily slowly nodded. "I understand." She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She simply waited. That calmness somehow made Officer Harris even more suspicious. People walking toward the courtroom began stopping to watch. Court clerks looked through nearby office windows. Even several attorneys paused their conversations. Then Officer Harris made a decision. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I'm placing you under temporary detention until we verify these documents." A quiet gasp spread through the hallway. Emily slowly looked at him. "Officer." "Yes. I truly believe there's been a misunderstanding. You can explain it later." Without another word, Officer Harris gently placed handcuffs on her wrists in front of everyone standing outside the courtroom. At that exact moment, the heavy courtroom doors slowly opened. A senior court clerk stepped into the hallway, looked directly at Emily, and suddenly froze. The senior court clerk stood completely still. His eyes remained fixed on Emily. For a brief moment, it looked as though he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he quietly stepped back into the courtroom and closed the heavy wooden doors. Officer Daniel Harris noticed. "You know her?" he asked. The clerk hesitated. I'm not sure." Then he quickly walked away. That strange reaction caught everyone's attention. Emily remained calm despite the handcuffs around her wrists. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand special treatment. She simply looked at Officer Harris. "Officer, may I ask you one question?" He nodded cautiously. "Go ahead. Have you confirmed that these documents are the ones mentioned in your report?" Officer Harris answered honestly. "Not yet." "Then perhaps that should happen first." The officer folded his arms. "We'll get to that." Emily gave a small nod. "I'll wait." Her calmness surprised everyone standing nearby. One young attorney whispered to another, "If I were in her place, I'd be terrified." The other attorney quietly replied, "She's acting like she knows something we don't." Meanwhile, inside the courtroom, the senior clerk hurried toward the court administrator's office. He knocked twice before entering. "Sir." The administrator looked up from his desk. What is it? I think we may have a serious problem. The administrator frowned. What happened? A woman has just been detained outside courtroom 3. So. I recognize her face. But I can't remember where from. The administrator stood immediately. Let's check the visitor schedule. The two men quickly walked to a computer and searched the courthouse records. Outside, Officer Harris carefully opened Emily's leather folder. Inside were several neatly organized sealed envelopes. Each carried the official courthouse seal. None appeared damaged. None appeared stolen. Officer Harris looked confused. Officer Lisa Morgan, who had just arrived to assist, quietly stepped beside him. Daniel, yes. These documents look officially sealed. They do. So why would someone steal papers they can't even open? Daniel remained silent. For the first time, doubt entered his mind. Emily watched quietly. I told you these documents belong with the court. Officer Harris looked at her. Who gave them to you? Emily smiled politely. The right person. Who? I'm sorry. I promised I would deliver them directly. Officer Morgan spoke softly. Daniel, maybe we should verify her visitor pass. Before he could answer, his radio suddenly came to life. Unit 7. Daniel picked it up. Go ahead. The dispatcher spoke clearly. We've checked the courthouse visitor database. Daniel waited. The woman you're holding. A brief pause followed. Does have an authorized appointment inside courtroom 3. Everyone nearby looked toward Officer Harris. He slowly lowered the radio. Officer Morgan asked quietly, so, should we remove the handcuffs? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Emily one more time. You still haven't told me why you're really here. Emily met his eyes calmly. You'll understand soon enough. At that exact moment, upstairs in the judge's private chambers, someone quietly knocked on the door. The judge looked up from the case files on his desk. Come in. The court administrator entered with a worried expression. He took a deep breath before speaking. Your Honor, something has happened outside your courtroom, and I believe you need to see it immediately. The court administrator stood inside the judge's chambers, his face filled with concern. Your Honor, something has happened outside your courtroom, and I believe you need to see it immediately. Judge Michael Carter looked up from the case files spread across his desk. He noticed the administrator's worried expression. What happened? The administrator hesitated. I'm not completely sure. But a visitor has been detained outside courtroom 3. The judge calmly closed the file in front of him. Has anyone been injured? No, Your Honor. Then what makes this so urgent? The administrator took a slow breath. Because something about this situation doesn't feel right. The judge nodded. Very well. I'll be there shortly. As the administrator left the chambers, the judge remained seated for another moment. He looked at the clock. The morning hearing was supposed to begin in less than 10 minutes. Outside in the courthouse hallway, the crowd had grown even larger. Lawyers whispered among themselves. Court employees quietly exchanged nervous looks. Even visitors who had business in other courtrooms had stopped to see what was happening. Officer Daniel Harris still stood beside Emily. The sealed document folder rested safely on a nearby security desk. Officer Lisa Morgan quietly walked over to him. Daniel. What? I've checked the visitor database myself. And? Everything matches. She has an official appointment. Daniel frowned. That still doesn't explain why she refused to identify who requested those documents. Emily answered before Officer Morgan could speak. I never refused. I simply said I'd hand them directly to the proper court staff. Officer Harris looked at her. Why keep everything so secret? Emily smiled gently. Because some responsibilities require discretion. Officer Morgan studied Emily carefully. There was something unusual about her. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to convince anyone she was innocent. It was almost as if she trusted that the truth would arrive on its own. Just then, the senior court clerk came running back into the hallway. His breathing was heavy. He looked directly at Officer Harris. Officer. Yes. The visitor authorization wasn't approved by an ordinary employee. Daniel crossed his arms. What do you mean? The clerk lowered his voice. It came directly from the judge's private office. The hallway instantly became silent. Officer Morgan looked surprised. The judge's office? The clerk nodded. Yes. Daniel looked toward Emily again. If that's true, why didn't you tell us? Emily answered softly. Because I wasn't asked the right question. Daniel stared at her for several long seconds. Before he could say another word, the heavy wooden courtroom doors slowly opened once again. The courthouse bailiff stepped into the hallway. In a loud, respectful voice, he announced, "All rise. His Honor is leaving chambers." Every person in the hallway immediately stood still. Officer Harris felt his heartbeat quicken. Emily quietly looked toward the courtroom doors. Her expression never changed. As the judge walked into the hallway, his eyes moved across the crowd, then stopped the instant they landed on the woman standing in handcuffs. For the first time that morning, the judge's calm expression completely disappeared. The courthouse hallway became unusually quiet. Everyone stared at Judge Michael Carter. Then they looked at Emily. Officer Daniel Harris felt a knot form in his stomach. The visitor authorization. The sealed documents. Everything had been approved by the judge himself before Emily had even entered the building. Daniel looked confused. "If Your Honor signed the authorization himself." He paused. "Why wasn't that information available to security?" The court administrator answered calmly. "Because confidential court deliveries are only visible to authorized court officials. Security officers only receive limited information unless additional verification is requested." Officer Morgan slowly looked toward Daniel. "So, we could have called the administrator before making an arrest." Daniel lowered his eyes. "Yes." Emily remained completely silent. She wasn't interested in proving anyone wrong. She simply waited. The judge carefully handed the authorization back to the administrator. "Please make sure this procedure is reviewed after today's hearing." "Yes, Your Honor." Several reporters standing near the courtroom quietly whispered among themselves. One of them asked, "Who exactly is this woman?" Another reporter replied, "I don't know. But the judge clearly knows her." That single sentence quickly spread through the hallway. Court employees began wondering the same thing. Why had the judge personally signed her authorization? Why was he speaking to her so calmly? Why had she never once tried to use his name? Officer Harris couldn't ignore those questions anymore. He looked respectfully at the judge. "Your Honor." "Yes, officer. I apologize if this question is inappropriate." The judge nodded. "Go ahead. May I ask how you know Ms. Carter?" The hallway became silent again. Everyone waited for the answer. The judge smiled slightly. "That question isn't important right now. What's important is making sure every visitor is treated fairly before assumptions are made." Officer Harris nodded respectfully. "I understand." But deep inside, his curiosity only grew stronger. At that moment, the courthouse administrator received another phone call. He listened carefully before looking surprised. "Really?" A few seconds later, he ended the call and walked toward the judge. "Your Honor." "What is it?" "The chief court administrator has arrived earlier than expected." The judge looked toward the courthouse entrance. "Please bring him here." Within moments, the chief court administrator entered the hallway. Every employee immediately stood a little straighter. He walked directly toward Judge Carter. Then, to everyone's surprise, he didn't greet the judge first. Instead, he walked straight to Emily. With a warm smile, he asked, "Emily, are you all right?" Emily smiled back. "I'm perfectly fine. I'm sorry you had to experience this." "It's all right." Officer Daniel Harris felt completely lost now. First the judge personally approved her visit. Now the highest court administrator knew her by her first name. Something much bigger was happening. The chief court administrator then turned toward the judge. "I believe it's time." Judge Carter nodded slowly. "I agree." The administrator looked around the crowded hallway before quietly saying, "Everyone deserves to know who Ms. Emily Carter really is, before today's hearing begins." The chief court administrator's words echoed through the hallway. "Everyone deserves to know who Ms. Emily Carter really is, before today's hearing begins." The crowd immediately became silent. Lawyers stopped whispering. Court reporters lowered their cameras. Even the officers stood quietly, waiting for the explanation. Officer Daniel Harris felt his heart beating faster. He looked at Emily. She still showed no sign of fear or anger. Instead, she gently looked at the chief court administrator. "Is that really necessary?" she asked softly. He smiled. "After everything that has happened today, I believe it is." Emily lowered her eyes for a moment. "If you think it's best." Judge Carter stepped forward. "I've always admired that about you. You never introduce yourself by your connections. You always let people know you for your character." Emily smiled warmly but said nothing. Officer Morgan quietly whispered to Daniel, "Have you noticed something?" Daniel nodded. What? Everyone important in this courthouse seems to respect her. Daniel looked around. She was right. The judge respected her. The chief court administrator respected her. The senior court clerk clearly knew her. Yet Emily had never once used anyone's name to avoid being detained. She had accepted every instruction with patience. That realization made Daniel feel even worse. At that moment, the chief court administrator looked toward the gathered employees. I want everyone here to understand something. He paused. Ms. Carter had several opportunities to identify herself differently today. He looked at Emily. She could have made one phone call. She could have mentioned one name. She could have ended this misunderstanding within seconds. The hallway remained completely quiet. But she didn't. Officer Harris slowly asked, "Why?" Emily answered gently. "Because respect should never depend on who someone knows. It should be given to every person." Those simple words touched everyone standing there. Even several reporters quietly lowered their notebooks. Judge Carter smiled proudly. "That's exactly the answer I expected." Just then, the courthouse entrance opened again. An assistant hurried inside carrying a sealed envelope. He walked directly to the chief court administrator. "Sir, what is it?" "The Judicial Council has delivered today's official appointment documents." The administrator accepted the envelope. Perfect timing. He looked toward everyone gathered in the hallway. "I was planning to announce this after today's hearing." He smiled. "But perhaps today has already given us the perfect moment." Officer Daniel Harris looked completely confused. "What announcement?" The administrator slowly opened the envelope. Inside was an official document bearing the courthouse seal. He handed it to Judge Carter. The judge glanced at the first page, then looked at Emily with a gentle smile. Emily seemed surprised. "You didn't tell me it was approved." Judge Carter smiled. "I wanted it to be a surprise." Everyone looked at one another. Another surprise? What could possibly be bigger than everything that had already happened? The chief court administrator stepped beside the judge and took a slow breath. Then he looked directly at Officer Harris before quietly saying, "Officer, before we begin today's hearing, there's one final truth you deserve to know about Ms. Emily Carter." The hallway was so quiet that no one dared to speak. Every eye was fixed on the chief court administrator. He slowly looked around the crowd before turning toward Officer Daniel Harris. "Officer," he said calmly, "you've acted according to what you believed at the time. But before today continues, there's one important truth everyone here deserves to know." Daniel nodded respectfully. "I'm listening." The administrator smiled gently before looking at Emily. "Ms. Carter, would you like to tell them yourself?" Emily quietly shook her head. "No. I'd rather you do it." The administrator understood. He turned toward the crowd once again. "That answer tells you exactly who she is." Several reporters looked confused. One whispered, "Why won't she just explain herself?" Another replied, "Because she doesn't want special treatment." Judge Michael Carter smiled proudly. "Exactly." He looked at everyone standing in the hallway. "Emily has always believed that respect should be earned through character, not through titles." Officer Morgan slowly nodded. "That's why she never mentioned your name." Emily smiled softly. "I wanted to be treated like every other visitor." Daniel lowered his eyes. "And instead, I judged the situation before I understood it." Emily looked at him kindly. "We all make mistakes. The important part is what we learn afterward." Those simple words made several courthouse employees smile. The chief court administrator then took one step forward. "Ladies and gentlemen." He paused for a moment. "I would like to formally introduce Ms. Emily Carter." The entire hallway became silent again. "She isn't simply a courthouse visitor." Another pause. "She isn't here as a witness. And she certainly isn't here because of today's hearing." Everyone leaned forward. Even the reporters stopped writing. The administrator smiled warmly. "Emily Carter is." Before he could finish, Judge Carter gently placed a hand on his arm. "I'll say it." The administrator nodded. "Of course, Your Honor." Judge Carter walked toward Emily. He stopped beside her. Without hesitation, he gently took her hand. The simple gesture surprised everyone watching. He looked toward Officer Harris first. Then at every lawyer, every reporter, every court employee, and every visitor standing in the hallway. In a calm, steady voice, he finally said, "This remarkable woman isn't here because she knows the judge." He smiled proudly. "She is my wife." A wave of shock spread through the courthouse. Several reporters gasped. One lawyer quietly whispered, I can't believe it. Officer Daniel Harris stood completely frozen. His face turned pale. He replayed every moment of the morning in his mind. Emily had never argued. Never raised her voice. Never once said, "I'm the judge's wife." She had simply trusted that the truth would come out on its own. Judge Carter gently looked at Emily. "I'm sorry you had to go through this." Emily smiled. "I'm just grateful the truth arrived before the trial began." Before anyone could speak again, the chief court administrator received an urgent message on his phone. He read it once. Then looked at the judge. "Your Honor, the Judicial Oversight Office has just requested the full security footage." He paused before adding, "They've decided to review everything that happened this morning, before today's court session officially begins." The courthouse hallway slowly emptied as everyone moved into the courtroom. But no one was thinking about the hearing anymore. Every conversation was about the same unbelievable moment. Emily Carter was the judge's wife, yet she had never mentioned it. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt completely different. Lawyers quietly organized their files, but many kept looking toward Emily with new respect. She simply took a seat in the front row, exactly where she had planned to sit from the beginning. She didn't ask for special treatment. She didn't ask anyone to defend her. She acted like any ordinary visitor. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Harris stood beside Captain Rebecca Lewis, the chief of court security. She had just finished watching the security footage from the courthouse cameras. After several minutes, she slowly closed the video. The room remained silent. Finally, she looked at Officer Harris. "Daniel." "Yes, Captain." "From the moment Ms. Carter entered the building until now, she followed every instruction." Daniel nodded quietly. "I know. She never resisted. No. She never became disrespectful. No. She never attempted to use her relationship with the judge." Daniel lowered his eyes. "Not once." Captain Lewis folded her hands. The video also shows that the court clerk attempted to explain her visitor authorization. Daniel remembered that moment immediately. "I interrupted him." "Yes." She continued calmly. "And Officer Morgan suggested verifying the records before placing Ms. Carter in handcuffs." Daniel sighed. "I should have listened." Captain Lewis wasn't angry. She simply wanted everyone in the room to understand what had happened. This wasn't caused by one bad decision. She paused. It was caused by several small assumptions made too quickly. Those words stayed with everyone. Judge Carter entered the security office a few moments later. Every officer immediately stood. The judge smiled politely. "Please, have a seat." No one expected what happened next. Instead of criticizing Officer Harris, instead of demanding punishment, the judge thanked every officer for protecting the courthouse every day. "I know your job isn't easy," he said. "You make difficult decisions under pressure." He looked directly at Daniel. "But every difficult decision must begin with one simple question." Daniel listened carefully. Judge Carter continued. "Have I verified the facts?" The room became completely silent. Those 5 words felt more powerful than any lecture. Emily quietly walked into the room. She smiled warmly at everyone. "I accepted Officer Harris's apology. I hope everyone here learns from today." Captain Lewis nodded. "We will." Just then, her office phone rang. She answered immediately. After listening for several seconds, her expression changed. She slowly looked toward Judge Carter. "Your Honor, the Judicial Oversight Office has completed its initial review." The room became silent once again. Captain Lewis took a slow breath before continuing. "They've reached a decision, and it won't affect only Officer Harris. They're ordering new courthouse procedures across the entire judicial district." The courtroom remained completely silent as Captain Rebecca Lewis lowered the phone. Everyone looked at her, waiting for the decision. She took a slow breath before speaking. "The Judicial Oversight Office has completed its initial review." Officer Daniel Harris stood perfectly still. "They've found no evidence of bad intentions," Captain Lewis continued. "But they have found that proper verification procedures were not fully followed before a visitor was detained." Daniel slowly nodded. "I understand. The review board has ordered additional professional training for all courthouse security officers." She looked around the room. "And starting next month, every courthouse in this judicial district will follow a new verification protocol before placing cooperative visitors under temporary detention." Several officers quietly nodded. No one argued. Everyone understood why the changes were necessary. Judge Carter smiled slightly. I believe that's the right decision. Captain Lewis agreed. Our goal isn't to blame people. Our goal is to prevent the same mistake from happening again. Officer Harris stepped forward. He looked directly at Emily. Mrs. Carter. Emily smiled gently. Yes, officer. I've apologized already. But I'd like to say one more thing. Emily nodded. I'm listening. Daniel took a deep breath. When I first saw you this morning, I saw only a situation. I never stopped to see the person standing in front of me. I won't forget that lesson. Emily's smile grew warmer. Neither will I. Judge Carter placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. The strongest professionals aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who are willing to learn from them. Those words filled the courtroom with quiet respect. Several lawyers nodded in agreement. Even the court reporters stopped writing for a moment. They realized this story had become much bigger than a misunderstanding. It had become a lesson about fairness, patience, and dignity. The chief court administrator stepped forward one final time. Today's hearing will begin shortly. But before we do, I'd like to thank Mrs. Carter. Everyone looked toward Emily. The administrator smiled. You reminded all of us that real character isn't revealed when people know your title. It's revealed when no one knows who you are. A quiet round of applause filled the courtroom. Emily looked around the room. I hope everyone remembers one simple truth. She paused before saying, every person deserves respect before they have to earn it. Just as everyone believed the morning was finally over, a courthouse assistant hurried into the courtroom carrying a sealed envelope. He walked directly to Judge Carter. Your Honor, this just arrived from the Chief Justice's office. Judge Carter opened the envelope and quietly read the first page. He smiled. Then he looked toward Emily. Finally, he turned to everyone in the courtroom and said, before we begin today's case, there's one final announcement I'd like everyone to hear. Judge Michael Carter carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. A gentle smile appeared on his face as he looked around the courtroom. I've just received a message from the Chief Justice, he said. After reviewing today's events, the Judicial Council has officially approved a new courthouse policy. Everyone listened closely. From today forward, every courthouse in this district will follow a respect before assumption policy. Before a cooperative visitor is detained, officers must complete additional verification whenever it is safely possible. The courtroom filled with quiet applause. Captain Rebecca Lewis smiled. This will make every courthouse stronger. Judge Carter nodded. That is exactly the goal. He then looked toward Officer Daniel Harris. Officer Harris. Yes, Your Honor. I hope today doesn't become the day you're remembered for making a mistake. Daniel looked surprised. I hope it's remembered as the day you chose to learn from it. Daniel smiled for the first time that morning. I promise I will. He turned toward Emily. Mrs. Carter, thank you for showing more patience than I deserved. Emily smiled warmly. We all have difficult days. What matters is what we become afterward. Daniel extended his hand. Emily gladly shook it. The courtroom quietly applauded once again. The tension that had filled the building only hours earlier had completely disappeared. Instead, there was a feeling of respect. Respect that had been earned through honesty. Respect that had grown from humility. Respect that reminded everyone why justice matters. The chief court administrator stood beside Judge Carter. Your Honor, the courtroom is ready. Judge Carter nodded. He looked at Emily. Thank you for reminding all of us that titles should never decide how a person is treated. Emily smiled. I've always believed that kindness should come before recognition. Judge Carter turned toward everyone gathered inside the courtroom. I hope every person leaving this room today remembers one lesson. He paused. The true measure of justice isn't how we treat important people. It's how we treat people when we believe they are ordinary. Those words stayed with everyone. The hearing finally began, but many people would remember the lesson from the hallway far longer than the case itself. Sometimes, the greatest hidden identity isn't someone's title. It's their quiet character. If you had been standing in that courthouse, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful hidden identity and justice story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next unforgettable story.